I spread the new lease papers on the stainless steel table, my fingers tracing the clean white space where my name should have been. The scent of yeast and cinnamon from the morning's baking still hung in the air of sweet and rising shared kitchen, mixing with the bitter taste of betrayal. Mark's girlfriend Jessica had drafted this while I was at the farmer's market collecting apples for cider donuts. The date in the corner showed October 15th, 3 days from now. My hands moved automatically to the drawer where I kept every email, receipt, and agreement since opening 2 years ago. The familiar click of the unlocking mechanism brought small comfort. Page after page, neatly organized in labeled folders, told the story of my partnership, my recipes, my investment. Jessica's signature was on page 3, but there was no line for mine. Only one question burned in my mind. Had Mark known? I've always been organized. My grandmother taught me that baking is chemistry and chemistry requires precision. Every measurement matters, every ingredient counts. So when I opened Rising Loaf Bakery 2 years ago, I knew my records had to be just as meticulous as my sourdough starter. My shelves are lined with blue notebooks, each one labeled with dates, names, and dollar amounts. The receipts are stacked chronologically in the metal cabinet behind the counter, right next to the bags of King Arthur flour. Mark Peterson showed up 6 months after I opened, smelling of expensive cologne and ideas. He proposed sharing this space, sweet and rising shared kitchen, what we called the Sweet and Rise. He had the capital, I had the recipes. He handled the marketing, I handled the dough. It seemed perfect until his girlfriend Jessica started showing up more often. First it was just deliveries, then it was consultations about branding, then it was suggestions about my recipes. Last Tuesday, she suggested I use fewer chocolate chips in my brownies. "The presentation looks cleaner," she said, arranging the baked goods with her perfectly manicured fingers. The next day, she moved my display rack 3 inches to the left without asking. By Friday, she'd replaced my hand-painted sign with something sleek and impersonal. I noticed every change because I notice everything, especially when it involves what I've built with my own hands. My fingers closed around the familiar leather-bound book I keep behind the counter, my chronicle of every business decision, every contract, every note of conversation. I flipped to the page dated September 12th, the day Jessica first suggested we rethink our partnership agreement. Her handwriting is precise, almost surgical. Mine is messy but clear, full of flour smudges and occasional coffee stains. There are 27 pages documenting the slow erosion of my place here, each page a testament to what might have been if I'd been less trusting, more careful from the start. I noticed it first on a Tuesday morning when I was arranging the display case. My hands, covered in those familiar white patches, were moving a tray of sourdough rolls when Chelsea appeared at the counter. Her gaze fell on my hands, lingered just a fraction too long. "You know," she said, her voice smooth as butter, "I've been reading about that skin condition. They have new treatments now, might help with the presentation." She reached out and touched my wrist, her fingers cool against my skin. I pulled back instinctively, my fingers brushing against the flour-dusted countertop. "That's private," I said, my voice tight, "and not something we need to discuss at work." "Oh, relax," she said with a dismissive wave. "Just trying to help. Perception is everything in this business." I made a note of it in my leather-bound chronicle that night, right after the bakery closed. September 18th, 8:47 p.m. Chelsea made insensitive comment about vitiligo while touching my arm, said treatments might help with presentation. I added the time because I remember looking at my phone when she said it, 8:37 a.m. The ink smeared slightly where my thumb brushed against it, leaving a faint smudge that looked suspiciously like the state of Rhode Island. I taped a small sample of my hand cream to the page, one that doesn't interfere with my baking but keeps my skin from cracking in the dry autumn air. The next morning, I found my grandmother's bread box missing. It wasn't just any bread box, solid maple, carved with her initials E.R. on the lid, her wedding gift to me when I opened my first stall at the farmer's market. I checked the usual spot on the shelf above the mixing station, ran my hands along the back where she sometimes hid extra flour scoops. Nothing. "Chelsea," I called out when I saw her restocking the espresso machine. "Have you seen my bread box, the maple one?" Her eyes shifted away from mine for a split second. "A bread box? No, haven't touched any of your things. Mark wanted me to reorganize the storage area yesterday. Maybe he moved it." But Mark had been in meetings all day, confirmed by Jessica when I asked her later. That night, I took measurements of where the box used to be, made a drawing of its exact position, and added a photograph of it from last month's family gathering where it sat proudly on the kitchen counter. I included a small sample of the beeswax polish I used on it every Sunday, its sweet honey scent now mingling with the flower in my chronicle. Underneath the photo, I wrote, "Bread box missing since September 19th. Last seen at 6:30 p.m. The grant rejection came in a thick envelope with the Riverbend County Small Business Initiative letterhead. I'd poured hours into that application, detailing my community outreach, my commitment to using local grains, my plans to expand the baking apprenticeship program for at-risk youth. The rejection letter mentioned lack of stable management structure as the reason for denial. That's strange. I told Jessica when I showed her the letter the next day. Our partnership agreement clearly outlines both our roles. It's been approved by the county before. She took the letter from my hands, her eyes scanning the page quickly. Well, you know how these things are. They probably want to see more. Oversight. Mark's been handling the business side of things anyway. Maybe you should let him take the lead on these applications. He can't sign things without my signature. I pointed out, though the words felt hollow as I said them. Details, she said with a shrug. I'm sure Mark will figure it out. That night, I printed every email between me and the county official, every receipt for ingredients I donated to the food bank, every thank you note from apprentices who'd gone through my program. I organized them chronologically in my chronicle, comparing them to the successful applications Jessica had sent me as examples. The paper had a slightly different texture. The county used recycled paper with faint flecks of blue and green, while the examples Jessica provided were crisp white with a watermark. I taped a sample to the page, circled the difference in blue ink, and wrote, "Grant application materials compared to examples provided by Jessica. Paper stock differs. Successful applications on county letterhead, examples on premium paper." October 2nd. The flour supplier issue came up 2 weeks later. Goldstone Mill had been delivering my organic stone-ground flour every Tuesday at dawn for 3 years. The delivery driver knew to tap 3 times on the back door. The sacks had my name written in permanent marker, and I always had a thermos of coffee ready for Mr. Henderson, who delivered it. But on October 16th, the truck arrived with a different driver who didn't know the 3-tap code. The sacks were marked with Peterson's Pastries instead of my name. "Morning," the new driver said, shifting a sack that looked lighter than usual. "Where do you want these?" "I'm Elena Rossi," I said, confused. "This should be for Sweet and Rising. Mark Peterson." "Nah," the driver shook his head. "Peterson's Pastries now, different arrangements." Called Goldstone Mill from my phone while the driver waited. "This is Elena Rossi. I've been getting flour deliveries every Tuesday for 3 years. Today's delivery was marked for Peterson's Pastries." "Ah, yes," the receptionist said. "Mr. Peterson arranged for the deliveries to be redirected last week, said you were discontinuing your operations." "That's not true," I said, my hand gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. "Can I speak to Mr. Henderson?" "He's on vacation, ma'am. Is there anything else?" The line went dead before I could respond. That night, I recorded the entire conversation in my chronicle, not just the words but the metallic taste of panic in my mouth when I realized what was happening. I included a sample of the flour that had been delivered, coarser than usual, with an odd grayish tinge, and wrote the date and time of the call next to it. "Flour delivery redirected. Called Goldstone Mill at 7:15 a.m. Confirmed by receptionist that Mark arranged change last week. We'll get official statement tomorrow." The corporate client was the final straw. Riverbend Industries had ordered custom gift baskets every holiday season for 5 years. Sourdough bread, local honey, handmade chocolates, all beautifully wrapped with the Sweet and Rising logo. Last year's order had been $8,400. This year's came from Peterson's Pastries. "I don't understand. I told Mark when I saw him in his office on November 3rd. Riverbend just placed their holiday order with you. We've had that account for 5 years. He looked up from his tablet, his eyes barely meeting mine. "They wanted to expand their offerings. We can provide more variety." "I provided everything they needed," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I developed those recipes specifically for their corporate gifts." "We're partners, Elena," he said, turning back to his tablet. "This is just business." Later that day, I found an email draft on Mark's computer, dated October 28th, that read, "Riverbend Holiday Gifts Discussion Points. 1. Present Sweet and Rising as artisan component of Peterson's Pastries. 2. Suggest phase transition. 3. Final meeting scheduled for November 5th. I printed it, folded it carefully, and taped it to a page in my chronicle. Next to it, I placed a small ribbon from last year's gift basket, the same shade of blue as Riverbend's corporate logo, and wrote, "Corporate client redirected to Peterson's Pastries. Found email draft in Mark's computer dated October 28th. Ribbon from previous gift basket attached. November 5th meeting approaching." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my apartment with the Chronicle open on my lap, turning pages that smelled of flour, honey, and anxiety. Outside, the autumn wind whistled through the maple trees, their branches scraping against my window like fingernails on a chalkboard. I traced the timeline with my finger, from Chelsea's first insensitive comment to the redirecting of my most valuable client. Each entry had a physical artifact attached: a smear of cream, a beeswax sample, a piece of paper, a flower sample, a ribbon. My records weren't just notes, they were evidence. The next morning, I walked into the suite and rise with a clear purpose. My fingers, those same hands that had shaped dough for 15 years, closed around the familiar leather cover of my Chronicle. I didn't need to shout or accuse. I had the facts, documented with precision and care. I just needed to present them to the one person who could make things right, our landlord, who held the lease that bound us all together. As I approached the office, I noticed Jessica emerging from Mark's office, carrying a stack of papers. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly when she saw me. For a moment, I thought she might say something. Instead, she clutched the papers tighter and hurried past me, her footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor of the shared kitchen. I knocked once on the landlord's door, then entered. My Chronicle felt heavy in my hands, filled with every detail, every incident, every piece of evidence I'd collected. This wasn't just about reclaiming my business anymore. It was about something much deeper, something about dignity and respect and the right to stand in a place I'd built with my own hands, patches of white skin and all. The landlord's office smelled of old paper and coffee grounds. Mr. Goldstone looked up as I entered, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Elena, nice to see you. What can I help you with?" "I need to discuss something about the lease," I said, setting my Chronicle on his desk with a soft thud. Just then, a stack of papers fell from the shelf behind his desk, scattering across the polished concrete floor. I knelt to help pick them up, my fingers brushing against familiar stationery from the sweet and rising office. "These must have fallen," Mr. Goldstone said. "These aren't yours," I said, recognizing the letterhead immediately. It was a draft of the new lease agreement for the shared kitchen space. As I gathered the pages, my hands began to tremble slightly as I saw the changes, most notably, the removal of my name as a tenant. Instead, only Mark Peterson and Sweet and Rising LLC were listed, with Chelsea Peterson listed as the new business manager. "That's interesting," Mr. Goldstone muttered, taking the papers from me. "I just got these yesterday. Mark said you were stepping back to focus on your solo work." The polished concrete floor of the kitchen suddenly felt very cold beneath my knees. I looked up at the landlord, my voice steady despite the pounding in my ears. "That's not what we agreed." Mr. Goldstone adjusted his glasses, squinting at the signature page. "Where is your signature, Elena?" "It's not here," I said, standing up. Because I wasn't told this new lease existed. I walked back to my workspace in a daze, the Chronicle still in my hands. My fingers traced the worn leather cover 15 times before I made a decision. I picked up my phone and began to photograph every document. I had lease agreements, emails, financial records, even the handwritten notes from when we first discussed sharing space. The flour dust from my morning baking settled on the desk as I worked, a silent witness to what I was about to do. My bakery wasn't just a business. It was my life's work. And I had every transaction, every conversation, every moment documented with the same precision I used to measure ingredients. Nobody was going to erase me from my own kitchen without a fight. Not Mark, not Chelsea, and certainly not without a mountain of evidence to prove otherwise. I spent that entire Tuesday night going through my Chronicle, methodically copying pages into a separate folder marked evidence. My hands knew the pattern before my mind fully registered it: the slight curl of a water-stained invoice, the specific weight of paper from different years, the way certain documents had a faint coffee ring in the corner from when I'd review them over breakfast. The bakery had closed early, leaving me alone with the smell of yeast and cinnamon still hanging in the air, mixing with the sharp scent of printer ink as I made copies of everything. The next morning, I arrived at Sweet and Rising before dawn, my feet making soft, scuffing sounds on the polished concrete floor. The pre-dawn quiet of the kitchen gave me time to arrange the documents in chronological order, just like I arranged my ingredients: systematic, precise, with nothing left to chance. By the time Mark arrived, his briefcase clicking smartly against his hip, the stack of papers was waiting on the table we used for planning sessions. "Elena, we need to talk about the lease," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Chelsea thinks we should finalize the new agreement by Friday." I nodded slowly, my hands resting flat on the table. "I've already seen it, Mark. The one that removes my name from the lease agreement." Mark's eyes finally lifted from his phone, his expression carefully neutral. "There's been some confusion about our business structure. Chelsea pointed out that since you're launching your solo venture, it makes sense to formalize the arrangement." I pushed a stack of papers toward him, the edges perfectly aligned. "These are the lease agreements we've had since we first opened this space. Every single one has both our names." My finger tapped the top document, including the one we signed last March. Below that, I placed another stack. "And these are all the emails where you referred to our arrangement as a partnership." Below that, another stack. "And these are the financial statements showing how we've always shared expenses and profits 50-50. Mark flipped through the first stack, his fingers leaving faint smudges on the pages. "I don't understand what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything, Mark," I said calmly. "I'm showing you facts that prove we had a partnership." Slid a single sheet across the table. "This is an email from 2 months ago where you wrote, 'Let's discuss how to allocate the new equipment costs for our expansion.'" "Our expansion, Mark, not your expansion or my expansion." Mark didn't respond immediately. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator in the corner. Outside, the morning sun was beginning to filter through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. "I spoke with Mr. Goldstone yesterday," I continued. "The landlord. He confirmed that any change to the lease requires both our signatures. He also mentioned something interesting." Mark finally looked up, his eyes narrow. "What did he mention?" "He mentioned receiving several phone calls from someone asking about the legal requirements for changing commercial leases in Riverbend County." I let that hang in the air for a moment. "Chelsea's been busy, hasn't she?" Mark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Chelsea has our best interests at heart. She's just trying to streamline things." "Streamline things by eliminating me?" I picked up a document from the middle of the stack. "This is the invoice for the new oven we bought last month. It's marked Sweet and Rising Joint Investment. Below that, there's the bank transfer showing we each paid half." Mark's gaze darted around the room, avoiding mine. "You're reading too much into this, Elena." "No, I'm not." I opened another folder and pulled out printed text messages. "These are from Chelsea's phone. Let me read you a few." I didn't wait for his response. "Mark, we need to get Elena out of the kitchen. She's making things difficult with her." And here the message gets cut off, but I can guess what word she used. "Let's see." "Oh, here's another one. The customers are asking about her skin condition. It's bad for business." And another one. "I told the supplier not to give her any discounts. She's not really part of the family." The color drained from Mark's face. "You went through her phone." "I didn't need to," I said. "She accidentally sent these messages to a group chat instead of just you. I was included in that group." I slid the printed messages across the table. "There are dozens more like these." Mark stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "I didn't know, Elena. I swear I didn't know she was doing this." "I believe you didn't know the extent of it," I said. "But you did know something was wrong, didn't you? Because when you received those messages, you never confronted her about them. You just let it continue." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Outside, a customer knocked on the door, causing the little bell to jingle. Mark flinched at the sound. "I need you to do something for me," I said finally. "I need you to call Chelsea right now and tell her our partnership is ending." Mark's head shot up. "What? No, we can't do that. We've built something together here." "Not together, Mark. Not according to these documents." I tapped the stack again. "According to these documents, I'm the one who handles the financial planning, the supplier negotiations, the customer complaints. According to these documents, I'm the one who's been at this kitchen at 5 a.m. every morning for the past 3 years while you show up at 10. According to these documents, I'm the one whose name appears on every single piece of marketing material." Mark swallowed hard. "What are you asking for?" "New terms," I said. "Equal partnership. We renegotiate everything with proper legal documentation that includes ironclad protections against third-party interference. And Chelsea has no role in our business decisions whatsoever." "I can't just cut Chelsea out of everything," Mark protested. "She's my girlfriend." "She's a liability," I said. "And according to these text messages, she's been actively undermining my business." I picked up a document with Chelsea's handwriting on it, a note she'd written to Mark that I'd somehow received by mistake. "Don't let her use the new equipment. She's just taking advantage of our generosity." I read it aloud. That generosity being my half of the investment in that equipment. Mark ran a hand through his hair, his eyes staring at the floor. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. You just have to decide. Do you want to continue being part of a legitimate business partnership, or do you want to let Chelsea turn this place into something it was never meant to be? He looked up, and for the first time, I saw real uncertainty in his eyes. I need to think about this. No, Mark, you don't. I pushed a single document across the table. This is the original partnership agreement we signed when we first started this place. Take a look at Section 3, Paragraph 4. I pointed to a specific line. It requires mutual consent for any changes to our business structure. Mark read the document, his brow furrowed. This is old. Legally binding. I corrected him. According to our lawyer, who I consulted last week when I first received the new lease agreement without my signature. Mark slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him. You planned this, didn't you? I plan to protect what I've built, I said. This bakery, this business, it's more than just a place to make pastries. It's my life's work. My fingers brushed against the edge of the chronicle, the worn leather familiar under my touch. Everything is documented here, Mark. Every conversation, every decision, every piece of evidence Chelsea thought she could erase. The bell on the door jingled again, and this time a customer walked in. Mark straightened up, putting on his professional mask. We'll have to continue this conversation later. No, I said firmly. We'll finish this now. Mr. Goldstone will be here at noon to discuss the lease. I've already arranged for him to meet with us both. Pulled out my phone and showed him the email confirmation. He'll be bringing the original lease with him. Mark stared at the phone screen, then back at me. You've already spoken with him. I spoke with him yesterday, I said, before you even mentioned the new lease. I gathered up the documents, organizing them into neat stacks. I've also spoken with our accountant, our lawyer, and our two biggest suppliers. Everyone knows the truth about our arrangement. What truth is that? Mark asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The truth that I'm not just your business partner, I said. I'm your equal in every way that matters, and I have the documentation to prove it. I stood up, my movements deliberate and controlled. The flour dust on my apron caught the morning light, turning the white patches of my vitiligo into something that almost seemed to glow. I'm going to prepare for the day's baking, I said. When Mr. Goldstone arrives, I expect you to be ready to sign a new partnership agreement, one that can't be changed by anyone except both of us. Mark didn't answer. He just sat there, surrounded by mountains of evidence that proved everything I was saying. As I turned to walk back to my workspace, I caught the scent of vanilla beans I'd left soaking overnight, sweet and comforting against the sterile atmosphere of legal documents and betrayal. When noon came, Mr. Goldstone arrived exactly on time, his leather briefcase swinging at his side. He nodded at both of us as he entered, his eyes immediately drawn to the stack of documents on the table. I've received your call, Elena, he said. Mark mentioned you had some concerns about the new lease. I have concerns about the entire arrangement, I said, opening a folder. Please take a look at these. I slid across the original lease agreement, the one with both our names, and then these. I slid across the new lease that had been sent to me, missing my signature. And finally, these. I slid across a copy of an email I'd received from Chelsea, accidentally sent to my work account instead of just Mark. Mr. Goldstone read through the documents, his expression becoming increasingly serious. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Mark. This is problematic. I can explain, Mark began, but Mr. Goldstone held up a hand. No explanation needed. The lease requires both signatures for a reason, to prevent exactly this kind of situation. He turned to me. What would you like to do, Elena? I want a new partnership agreement, I said. One that clearly outlines our equal ownership and decision-making power, one that cannot be changed without the consent of both parties, and one that specifically addresses third-party interference. Mr. Goldstone nodded. That's reasonable. I can draft something up. There's no need, I said, sliding another document across the table. I've already prepared one. It was a carefully crafted partnership agreement that I'd had my lawyer review the night before. Every clause was designed to protect both parties while ensuring neither could be marginalized or excluded. Mark stared at the document, then looked at me. You were prepared for this. I was prepared for this possibility, I said, because I understand how business works, Mark. I know that agreements are only as strong as the documentation that supports them. That's why I keep copies of everything. Mr. Goldstone read through my proposed agreement, nodding occasionally. This is thorough and fair to both parties. He looked at Mark. What do you think? Mark took a deep breath, then nodded slowly. It works for me. Good, I said. Then let's sign it now. I pulled out 2 pens and placed them on the table. Mr. Goldstone, would you be willing to witness our signatures? Certainly, he said, taking his own pen. As I signed the document, my hand was steady and sure. The ink flowed smoothly across the page, each signature a mark of ownership and dignity. When I finished, I passed the pen to Mark, whose hand trembled slightly as he signed his name. With the new agreement in place, Mr. Goldstone collected the old lease and stood up. This is taken care of, then. It's taken care of, I agreed. Mark watched as Mr. Goldstone walked out the door, then turned to me. I'm sorry, Elena. I didn't know Chelsea was doing any of this. I know, I said. But now you do, and now you understand why I keep such careful records. The bell on the door jingled as a customer walked in, breaking the tension that had filled the room. The bell above the door announced Chelsea before I saw her. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Mark. 6 months later, my bakery smells like cinnamon and possibility. The Vita Variety display case stands near the register, showcasing pastries where the swirl of white frosting mirrors my skin's patterns. Mark comes in twice a week, always on time, always with the week's reports neatly organized. His hands don't shake anymore when he hands me the paperwork. The gold-embossed receipts from my first successful shipment to Goldstone Mills sit in a blue binder on my desk. Each page contains dates, amounts, and signatures. Chelsea's name doesn't appear anywhere. Last Tuesday, a woman with similar white patches on her cheeks asked if I still had the binder that started it all. I showed her where I keep it now, right next to the flour. A good baker knows what ingredients go into every loaf. A good business owner keeps a record of every ingredient that goes into her success. Don't you think?